This is Tommy's Outdoors 75, and our guest today is David Smith of Rewilding Ireland, and that obviously means that in this episode we talk rewilding. But we talk rewilding in general, not specifically related to Ireland, or there is some specifics Irish related, but we talk a lot about rewilding in general. So if rewilding is your thing, this episode is definitely for you. And once you're done listen to this episode, go ahead and go to Twitter and find out if Twitter is your thing, obviously, and find Rewilding Ireland on Twitter and give them a follow. There is a tons of very interesting conversations going on there, and various people get involved. Not only pro rewilding, but let's say people who are more skeptical about rewilding as well. So very interesting conversations are going on there. And just before I let you enjoy this episode of Tommy's Outdoors, just a quick reminder that Tommy's Outdoors have also a YouTube channel. So, and all the episodes of the podcast are available there on YouTube, but also a lot of more goodies. So head on to YouTube, find Tommy's Outdoors there, and give it subscribe. Yeah, I think that's it for the intro. And so now, without any further ado, ladies and gentlemen, David Smith and Rewilding Ireland. Go. All right, recording. David, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
It's good to have you, and I'm really happy to have you because we spoke about rewilding many times with many guests and with you as well on Twitter. And you are a man behind Rewilding Ireland, the Twitter account at Rewilding IRE for everybody listening. So go and give it a follow. I must say, I admire your, what you're doing because you're engaging in conversation and you're kind of driving the conversation. And it's, Twitter is not always place when you can exchange thoughts in a kind of constructive manner and have some meaningful exchange. And you're kind of like pulling that off.
Yeah, well, that was the whole point of setting up the account. Kind of set it up there January of this year, and I just noticed that there was no real kind of central point of discussion in Ireland for rewilding. I know there's people out there doing great work and everything, but it's kind of scattered all over the place, and there's nothing that kind of just screams rewilding. So I just said I'd put together the account just to try and see if it had any benefit, and people seem to like it and kind of engage with it a good bit, and I'm trying to use it as maybe just to kind of understand where people are with rewilding in Ireland. There is a plan kind of for the future. COVID has gotten in the way, but I'm just trying to see what people think of rewilding in Ireland and build kind of a sort of a point of contact for it. If anyone has any questions, they might just throw me in it. I can reach out to other people. I'm by no means an expert, but I'm finding it good and very good to get feedback from people.
I noticed that you're very, you're very humble, and you always say like, I'm not an expert, but that's very good. Is what I noticed that usually people who are first to say like, I'm not an expert in something are usually people who you should listen the most because they have a kind of like a balanced approach to everything. Listen, David, you said there are some other plans. Are you comfortable with sharing what you're thinking about, or is it all just you prefer not to talk about at the moment?
Well, it's not really in concrete yet, so there was a kind of a plan to maybe set up something a bit more formal, not another ENGO or something like that, but maybe a collective or something like that. Plans might be still on just to have something in Ireland. I know that there's good work done out there by the Irish Wildlife Trust, Pádraig Fogarty in particular. He does a lot of stuff like that, and I'd be kind of looking to maybe set up just some sort of a centralised conversation in Ireland. We'll see how it goes, though. It is early days, and I get distracted with other side projects a lot, so we'll see how it goes. I'll be in the loop, though, don't worry.
But you're finding that there is a need for this sort of conversations. You finding a lot of interest in that, are you?
There is a lot of interest. The past few years, it has grown across the world, really, in terms of a practice. In Ireland, it's a weird kind of conversation where we are at the minute now. Like, some people are for it, some people are against it, and some people don't want to talk about it at all. So, like, it's good to have the discussion. I think I much prefer somebody to be against rewilding rather than have no opinion on it, because at least if they're against it, we can work on what the issues are there and see what the path forward is. But when there's no opinion on it, it's very hard to kind of figure out what the reception is in Ireland, and what people actually do think about the big questions like reintroduction, expanding national parks, management of species as part of rewilding, which some people might disagree with. I think at this stage there is a need for some sort of management plans to be drawn up as part of a rewilding scheme in Ireland. So there is a lot of stuff out there that needs to be kind of ironed out in an Irish context. Like, the conversations are happening in the UK, the conversations are happening in France and Germany, but there's nothing really happening here at a I would say the full spectrum, like between agriculture and conservation, the NGOs and the government. Like, so it'd be good to kind of get something like that started, I think.
Yeah. And do you have you had any negative feedback so far?
I got a good bit of negative feedback.
Oh, really?
Yeah, a lot of people are against the big W word for some reason, and you get a lot of people telling you kind of why they think it won't work. In fairness, they're probably right in some ways that, like, wolf reintroduction won't work at the minute in Ireland. Make no bones about it. Like, it is a contentious subject, but the reasons aren't ecological reasons for not bringing the wolf back to Ireland. That's the one major problem I'd have. There's no ecological reason being presented to me at the moment that can't be discussed or, like, worked on in the near future to bring back the wolf. Like, so that's something that kind of is interesting to get people's feedback and see where they are with. Even if
look, man, I get it, and I think, even like Tommy's Outdoors is a conversation platform. At least I'm trying to, for you and people who following what I'm doing. I have people with all sorts of spectrums and on a podcast, and I enjoy talking with them. And conversation is like the only way to actually make a progress and know. So I'm not surprised that you have also negative, like a positive feedback, because, and that's something I said many times on the podcast. I was not aware that rewilding might be a controversial term. And like you mentioned, some people don't even like the term, and they like, why we not call it this? And why we not call it that? Right? It seems like the word is burning, and like, let's use a different word.
Yeah, I know where you're coming from there. Like, to me, rewilding is more than the ecological part of it. Like, ecologically, it's just restoration. That's all rewilding is. But when you look at the whole kind of spectrum that goes with it, the cultural, the social aspects, then you're into more of a philosophical side. And that's where rewilding really comes into its own. It's more of a question of where people see themselves in relation to nature. Do they see themselves as part of nature? Do they see themselves as separate to nature? So, like, rewilding in itself is just restoration, but with the added social kind of the social part of it as well. Like, so, like, let's say if we take the example of the wolf, like, to bring the wolf back, it's ecological restoration. We get our core areas, we get our corridors, we build the island that way. We'd obviously have to bring in some form of schemes for farmers to make sure there was no livestock damage, there was no financial loss. We'd have to make sure that there was no danger to people, there was no danger to domestic pets, or the danger was reduced. That's all ecological restoration. But then you have to look at, how do people feel with living with predators? How do we feel about, like, giving up some of the control that we have of land and of our environment to other things? Like, that's kind of where rewilding comes into its own. There is no real definition of rewilding that I've seen. Like, it's not a defined term. It's a phrase that kind of encompasses a whole set of things that go with it, in my opinion anyway. So I think that's why it is controversial. Like, people see it as something that will get rid of people from the countryside. I don't believe that at all. I see people as part of the wild, like some people will disagree with that, but like to me, people and the wild go hand in hand. People can live in wild places. It's just about how much we're kind of willing to let go to self-fill land and the cultural change that goes with restoring the islands to some of its former glory.
Yeah, that's an interesting point that you made, that this is not so much ecological actions, which this is very interesting. You're saying essentially that the restoration is a part of rewilding, and that another part is change the attitude of. I would like you to go deeper on that, because that's very interesting. Do you think that this is something that is causing so much tension? That restoration in itself will be like, oh, okay, we can do this, but we don't have space for it. All right, get out. But then you're talking like, well, but you need to change your attitude, and that's where it's
not so much that you have to tell people to change their attitude, but it kind of is another knock-on of it. Like in Ireland, Ireland is weird in the sense of we have so much farmland, we have so much land ownership, like compared to a country like the UK. The UK has a lot more public land. It has rights of way through land. Like there's a different relationship with land there. In Ireland, there is a post-colonial mindset with land. I suppose that might be controversial to say to some, but I see it this way, like where we view land as differently to the rest of Europe because of our history and our past. So the association we have with land and giving up control of that is different to what people in the UK or people in France or people in Germany might have. So I think that's kind of another thing we have to look at as well. Like when I say the cultural aspect of it, maybe rewilding is addressing our relationship with land and the values we associate with it.
Yeah, and that's not something new that you just mentioned, that the different approach to land ownership in Ireland. But there is the first time I heard about this problem when I was reading about I think the project in the United States is called it was I'm going to butcher the name now, but it was something like a Great Plains Wildlife Reserve or something like that, and it's really deeply rooted. Like for generations, people were all they were doing, they were kind of trying to get land from the wild, right? They turn it from the wilderness, turning it into farmland, and it was good, and they were building their houses and families and all that. And they feel like now we're coming in and saying like, oh, everything that you were doing for the last 200 years was wrong, right? Give it back to nature, give it back to, which is, something that is deeply ingrained. And I think that's on some level, it's subconscious really how people feel about thing. And I agree with you on one thing, that no project like that, and even if it comes to conservation or anything like that, in my opinion, it starts with land management. But then when you're getting into land management issues, boy, that's a minefield, right?
Yeah. Like I can't comment on the Great Plains one. I think I know what you're on about, but I'm not too well read on it.
I probably it's called something else, but the idea is to buy off the ranches and the huge amounts of land and essentially rewild it. People are kind of hesitant to selling that even.
Yeah, well, that's probably part of the conversation we need to have in Ireland. Like, how do we rewild the land? Like, do we take land, well, not take lands, do we take lands out of commission from farmland? Like, do we set up funds to buy lands off people that are willing to sell, if they're willing to sell? Or do we look to the farmers and we go, look, is there something we can do here where we can create wilderness within your land and pay you for it, so that we have areas of wild that are still agricultural land and managed to some degree, so you've high HMV or something like. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of the conversation that could be had in Ireland. I don't know if it will be had, but like, just taking the land off people and removing people from the land isn't the answer to the problem at all. Like, Ireland will never have people not on the land, so like we need to account for that when we're looking at the wilderness. Like, people were always on the land in Ireland up until before the English came. Like, there was trees being knocked, there was woodland being converted into farmland. Like, it was part of our culture. Like, so. Mm-hmm. I don't think we need to take people off the land. I don't think we need to be as draconian as purchase land and turn it into the wilds. I think there is a happy medium there that people can work with. Like, the wilds can be different to what people think it is.
And this is nicely bringing me to another point, that every time I talk with farmers, in excellent majority of cases, in fact, I can say that in my case, with the farmers that I talk to, it's 100%. They love nature. They love animals. They love the landscape. They love the mountains. They love being outdoors. They're doing their biodiversity projects. They're digging ponds, or granted, they're cutting hedges on the road, but then they leaving the hedges inside their farm and doing all this stuff. And an unfortunate part of that is that quite often it seems like farmers are almost pitted against the other, movement, whether we call them rewilding movement or whatever else. And there's like a incredible tension, which is, it's unfortunate on one end, and I don't see the way how to smooth it out, let's say, because I see the conflict quite clearly, and surely you see that too.
Yeah, no, I'm part of it at times as well. Like, I'm not going to lie, there's some things that I disagree with vehemently, and I will not be afraid to say it on Twitter at times. But what you kind of went back to there with farmers building ponds and everything, like, that is part of HNV and conservation, and they're vital to it in Ireland, and they don't get enough credit for it, but they're also not paid for it, and that's a major problem. That needs to be looked at as well. There is CAP reform coming, and CAP reform should really pave the way for HNV. Like, obviously there will always be an element of intensive farming in the world. There has to be, to feed as many people as there is here, but there is a better way to do it. There's a smarter way to do it, and we need to look at, maybe we don't need to farm all the land we are farming. We can leave some to scrub. Like, farmers are penalised in their basic farm payment at the minute for having scrub. So, like, obviously scrub is nowhere in the country because it doesn't pay the farmer to have it there, and they have to pay money to have it there. So, like, farmers do love biodiversity. It's just it's not paid for at the minute. Like, so that needs to be asked of the farming organisations, of the government, why it isn't being paid, like, and look at paying farmers for those services.
Yeah. The other thing is that also came up when I was talking about native woodlands, that there are certain projects, and the projects goes for 2, 4, 6 years, and the farmer converts parts of the land into woodland, and it's all beautiful. And then project comes to an end. It's like, okay, no more payment for that, right? And it's like, okay, so I guess I'm going to cut out all the native woodland now and turn it into pasture again, and run cattle on it. So there is no continuity. So every project like that, it needs a commitment for decades rather than for the next governmental change.
Yeah, no, that's a major problem. Like, if we go back to reps, when it was set up, was paid as a transitional payment to farmers.
What reps? Could you decipher that?
The Rural Environment Protection Scheme, it ran for, was it 3 or 4 phases now? Sorry, I was off the farm towards the end of it, but it was basically a government fund where they paid farmers. I don't know, the way it was kind of explained to me on the farm where I kind of half grew up was it's paid farmers to tidy the place up a bit. So, like, they put in fences, kind of left 1.5 meters between drains and everything, like, so there was a bit of grass. You were only supposed to cut at certain times, leave meadow hedges around. They're the ones I can remember off the top of my head now. Sorry, it was wild. It was kind of around the 2000s. It ran, and like, a lot of farmers signed up, and a lot of farmers put money into it. But the problem was the scheme stopped. The scheme, as it was marketed, was a payment for farming that way, but the way it was actually probably run was as a transitional payment to allow farmers to cover the costs incurred while setting up the new fence and electric fencing or something like that. So that wasn't fair on farmers at all. What you do need to be looking at is 100-year kind of plans, 50-year plans, like, at minimum, because that you need to be thinking in these kind of timeframes. If you're planting trees now, they're only going to start to mature in 50 years. So that's kind of the time frame that needs to be applied. And that's one of the things as well with rewilding, that people kind of maybe hasn't been communicated to the farmers, or like farmers maybe don't want to kind of engage in it for fear of things like wolf reintroduction or something. But a rewilding scheme would have to have a long-term view of where things are going to go. Like, rewilding isn't about an end goal, it's about putting the processes in, so you're not entirely sure of the end goal, but you can know for certain, like, in 50 years time this scrub will develop into woodland kind of thing. So like, that would be part of the conversation if we had a national kind of ecological restoration program. You'd be looking at these, you'd be going, okay, in 100 years time, what do we want the country to look like? There's a patch of woodland up here, there's a patch of woodland down here, can we develop woodland in between? Can we pay farmers to maintain that? Like, so that's kind of, if you think outside the box and go the big picture, like, this is kind of where farmers can benefit from rewilding kind of initiatives or restoration initiatives, and see what benefits they can get from it. And obviously farmers as well will have a voice in any action, so they could also benefit from, if there was more kind of forestry programs, they had continuous cover forestry in their lands, that marginal lands or something like that. There's plenty of benefits there for farmers if they were to engage. Not saying they don't now, but like, if there was a program for them and they signed up, it could be very beneficial to everyone, a lot better than what we've seen with reps and stuff like that.
Yeah. Listen, if you were elected a advisor to Prime Minister or to agriculture TD, and you would have to advise how to even start kind of building bridge between farmers and let's call them rewilders, right? For the purpose of this conversation, where would you start?
We get everyone into a room together to talk is probably the first thing that needs to be done. Like, and there needs to be fair engagement from everyone. It is the same goal at the end of the day. You want nature there and you want people to get paid. Like, that's the two basic rules of any discussion or rewilding program in Ireland. So it's a big question. I don't know how to get there. I know that there's kind of, people are starting to kind of see that we can't go on the way we're going at the minute. There needs to be a big change. Climate change, obviously, with temperatures up in Siberia at 45 degrees, was it, or something ridiculous? 45,
something.
Yeah, land temperature. Like, we can't continue on the way we are going. There has to be a serious change, and we have to obviously pay the people that are going to be bringing that change about. So, what do we do? I'm asking. I don't know.
That's why you set up the whole platform for discussion about it. What to do?
I don't know. Like, we need to have a big look at long-term carbon sequestration through farming. We need to look at building resilient ecosystems. So how do we pay farmers for that? Like, we might not be producing food, but we could be sequestering carbon. Do farmers get paid the same for that? Would they be okay getting paid to do stuff like that? Does it align with what they want to do in their job? Because a lot of farmers might not want to have a more passive farming role as well. It's like, so. Yeah. I don't want to say what I think the discussions will go like. It's probably best if we get the people into a room and just see what the discussions happen. I'd probably throw a lot of money at it though, because that'll help fix it a bit.
Yeah. Well, I think that in some cases it might be a problem to even get people in a room because, like you said, some people don't want to engage at all. It's like, no.
Yeah, that is a part of it as well. But I think there is genuine desire for engagement there. I know that some of the platforms like Twitter probably aren't the best to show it, but there is people out there that want to talk. Like, a lot of people, I think farmers are getting a bad rep and rewilders are getting a bad rep. So if the two of them got into a room,
because these are like a bucket terms, right? And they're like, all farmers, as if all farmers are the same, right? There are different farmers, and I'm sure you notice that if you follow social media, sometimes you see like a vast disagreements between the farmers, and you see vast disagreements between the rewilders or whatever we call that group. Listen, I just want to kind of slowly drift away from the more of a political aspects of it and talk more, unless there is something you feel like we should mention still in relation.
Well, I think we're fairly good. I'd say I'd probably butchered a few of the lines there, but hopefully I didn't annoy anyone too much with my comments.
Oh well, listen. We encourage feedback, and if everyone has a feedback, they know where to find me, where to find you, and leave the comments. And knowing you, surely you're not gonna leave that unanswered. And I'm gonna chime in as well with my views, which I'm trying to be like I really trying to make my opinion on it. And I was asked. Few times like, yo, Tommy, what do you think, what side you're in? And the honest answer is like, I don't know. I'm listening, and I'm trying to figure it out.
Well, I mean, just to go back to that, maybe, is where's the wildest place in Europe you've ever been?
I think it must be in Poland, the Białowieża forest.
And could you imagine that in Ireland?
No.
No, why not?
But it might be purely kind of mental laziness on my part. It's so vast. It's a lot of, and we even had that discussion last night about animals moving freely within the continent of Europe, where Ireland, I think, and Great Britain, island of Great Britain, and island of Ireland are there are islands. So other than magpies being blown or something like that, you have no option of wild animals crossing. And I've seen what was happening in Poland, with wolves, with bear, with all. It was interesting because a couple of years ago I went to Poland specifically to photograph and observe brown bear, right? And we were based literally 500 meters from Ukrainian border, and it was like three countries, borders of three countries coming together, and those animals are roaming freely. And in Ukraine you can hunt bear, in Poland you cannot hunt bear, and these bears are moving around and you see their behaviors, and that's very interesting. Other thing with Białowieża is that this is one of the places that were actually never destroyed. So, and I know that it seems like there are powers in Polish government that are hell bent on destroying that after all. But like Ireland is kind of, there's not a lot of wildlife. That's something that was mentioned casually to me. I live in Ireland for 13 years now, and I think that was something that was mentioned that just casually by one of my friends. Just a couple of years once I settled, and I never thought about it a lot because I kind of accepted that this is how it is, right? And then you meet people like Padraig Fogarty, and you read his book, and he's like, oh, hang on a minute, that's actually. And I think that also that's a part of, because it's kind of small place, and it's easier to destroy, maybe, that these are my thoughts.
Well, I don't know, like, I think maybe if you could picture that old woodland in Ireland, you're kind of halfway there to rewilding. Like, I hope one day we'll have something like that. I'm not entirely sure what it will look like.
Mm-hmm.
But that's kind of just something that looks after itself. Obviously, the size of the woodland, I'm not entirely sure how big it is. Ireland's 86,000 kilometers squared. Mm-hmm. So I don't know if it'll ever have something as big and as pristine as that. But we should be aiming for something as self-willed as that woodland. Mm-hmm. And it'd be great to see in Ireland, like what you brought up there about the Ireland not having a lot of wildlife. Yeah, like a lot of people don't realize that. Like, we're kind of immune to the sterile environment we have outside. Like, when I was growing up, until I was probably 8 or 9, I thought Sitka plantations were native woodland because I just saw them everywhere where I was as a kid. Like, it was like, oh, we're going into the woods, and we'd run through it, and I'd be like, kind of strange the way there's nothing in here, like in the other films you see around the place, like, and you're just running through dark woodlands going, what what's this like? But then you see maybe, I don't know, what's the first wild thing I've ever seen in my life? I was a kid, I'd say probably foxes around the sheep. That was it. Like, that kind of gets you hooked, and you're like, oh, there's foxes, what does that do? And then you kind of look around and you go, what else is there? But like, we have so little, and people just kind of, I think they are limited by what they think we can have. Like, we could have what's in, I can't pronounce the name, I'm terrible at the pronunciation, I'm sorry. We could have what's there, like, we could. There's no reason we couldn't. I know it is old woodland, but we'll plant it now and come back in about 500 years and see where we are. Like, there's no reason why we couldn't attempt to even wish for it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And again, I think that this all starts with, setting aside the land for that, and on a, in a fair manner, and with a buy-in from all the stakeholders and owners of the land. It's interesting thing that you're asking me, and that that where that conversation is going, because I remember when I started hill walking, and I was walking on the hills, and that was again kind of my feeling was like, well, I'm probably not gonna see any wildlife, right? And that struck me as kind of odd, because I'm in this kind of like a remote, wild, in air quotes, place, but I'm not even expecting to see any wildlife, right? And then I'm coming to the peak of the hill, and there are like a bunch of sheep there. It's like, oh, now I'm not gonna find the wildlife, right? Because it's clearly the sheep are crazy.
It's just crazy though that we kind of, not that we accept it, but it's just that that's what we think is our wildlife. Like, now that's the thing in places, like, but it's I'd love to do a study on it just to see how much that kind of affects people's perception of nature. Like, so not seeing it, you're not going to want it back. Like, that's probably another thing as well with the rewilding is count, is just to get the discussion going and to like make people aware. Like, when I started off the account, I did ask the questions about, what would you think about the wolf in Ireland? What would you think about the what else do we have? I'm off the top of my head here now. I think I asked, the boar, the lynx, kind of Cape Cayley, like all these animals. And a lot of people didn't know that, like, some of them were native at a point of time. Like, we had the wildcats as well for a while. Like, what do we do? Like, do we just leave them out forever? It's just, I don't know. Like, even yourself, like, you can imagine the Beelzebubs. Sorry. You can't imagine that in Ireland, but like, that was here at one stage. Like,
absolutely.
You know what I'm trying to say? Like, it's kind of crazy the disconnect we have from what was here and what we could have again, because we're looking at it at this point in time going, no, that can't be possible. Do you know? I'm not giving out like granted. I'm just saying it's just crazy that we limit ourselves in our imagination.
It's a change, and that's, I'm loving that conversation, because I just thought about something that it's a little bit like we're a little bit on part that I'm looking into outdoors activities. There's across the world, there is dropping recruitment of hunters. There's less and less hunters, and I think this is part of the exact same kind of trend. That people, that in general, hunters are people who like to be in the woods. They like nature. They like to be there. They like to see the animals. They like to interact with it. They like to know what deer and fox and wolf and boar and whatever animals are doing, and what time of the year they have young and whatever, right? And there's a less and less, and you can blame PlayStation always on it. But now my thinking is that this is kind of the same trend, that people are kind of pushed into the cities, and they're kind of pushed into the, everything is kind of normalized. There's a concrete, there's a pathway, and there's a car park, and here's, I'm getting food from this box, I'm getting food, and in this box I can, get my ass into the water, and I'm going there just to move my body a little bit, because, otherwise, and it seems like in general we are moving away from that. So what
a lot of famous kind of ecologists would call that is the declining baseline syndrome. We just have less and less, and we just take that as standard. So like, you look out and you see a few sheep, you don't see any deer. Like, you're not going to go out there to go hunting. You're like, oh, it's only sheep out there now. You're kind of disconnected. What's the point in going out stalking deer for a day if you're going to find only one and you're going to miss the shot? Not that you miss now or anything, but like that kind of thing. Like in Ireland, you probably could just turn around and find the deer. But like, what's exciting to go out there that you can't play on PlayStation? Like, you can go shoot on PlayStation now, get less wet, and it's probably more exciting because there's more in it. Whereas we go outside and there's a rake of deer, a rake of sheep, and a burnt hillside. Like, that's it.
Yeah. Do you feel sometimes like it's an uphill battle?
Oh yeah, like I don't work in the environments kind of industry at the minute. I'm in environments sector. I'm in industry at the minute. I'm probably a bit more separated than if others. Part of rewilding is to get involved in the conversation again. It is an uphill battle. Like, I've had conversations with friends and they go, oh, we don't want wolves in Ireland, kind of thing. Just having a casual conversation over that and just kind of explaining through everything, like explaining kind of the trophic cascade video. Do you know the Yellowstone video, George Monbiot? That was very helpful tool for kind of talking it through with friends. But then you get the questions like, oh, we don't have any space for them. The farmers will never want them here. And you're like, that's nothing to do with actually bringing wolves back here. That's more kind of a people element to it. And they're like, yeah, but we can't do it. I was like, why can't we do it? Like, can we not just have the conversation kind of thing? They go, no, we need hundreds and hundreds of kilometers squared. And you're like, we actually only need 30 kilometers squared core area with good prey in it. And they're like, yeah, but the farmers. And then you're like, well, obviously we kind of talk to the farmers and see what they want. And they're like, no, you just can't do it. And you're like, okay. it is very frustrating and kind of circular.
Yeah. Before we get into that, like a big rewilding, what is your view on the so-called micro rewilding? Like, you know, people just want to leave the part of their lawn kind of not caught in like these little things.
I'm a massive fan of it. Like, this kind of goes back to the philosophy kind of comment. So you have your restoration and then you have the rewilding part of it. So it is the philosophy behind it. Kind of like, if you can rewild your back garden with a pond wall full of ivy or something and just leave it for the bugs, that's perfect. Like, I'm very much in favor of it. It's bringing nature back into people's lives. So it's only a positive thing. I do wish there was kind of more resources and more kind of mainstream media coverage of it. Like, we don't see in gardening shows how to build wildlife sanctuaries in your back garden. Like, a lot of people, I was thinking about this the other day, a lot of people feed the birds in their back garden, but not a lot of people kind of plant the seeds to attract the insects or give the berries for the birds. So kind of that's, I don't know what paradox of it. Like, they want nature there, but they're not setting up nature properly. Like, if you can plant fruit and trees out in your garden and feed the birds, that's perfect. That is rewilding to a degree in your own kind of back garden. Big fan of it.
Yeah.
Do you get what I'm trying to say there? Like, it makes people more aware of their nature. Like, a lot of people over lockdown even as well have got into bird watching out the back garden, and a lot of people now are like feeding the birds and everything. Like, so I'm hoping that can kind of grow into feeding the birds, feeding the insects, the badgers, the foxes, kind of things, like having the proper trees out the back garden, having a pond for frogs and everything. Like, it can grow that way.
Yeah. I think this is again going back to what we said earlier, that for generations it was struggle against the nature, right? You had to fight against the nature and kind of convert that woodland into the field where you can run your sheep, and you had to fight against wolves and other animals so they not eat your sheep and so on. And at some point, and I think that we are starting to, I believe that we are starting to convert from, oh, we fighting against this to keep alive, to start like, well, now we need to fight to actually not lose all of it.
Yeah. Because
we are so good at it that now we're going to run out and we don't have anything left. So I think it's changing. And I'm glad that you said that you're a fan of it, like this micro rewilding. I'm a
huge fan of it. I think it's great if people show an interest. Like, one of the main things I got questions on when I started the account was people asking what can they do with the back garden and everything. Like, so it is great to see that enthusiasm there, because that just grows, especially if you kids seeing that out their back garden. That's just going to grow into an appreciation of nature more and more as you grow up.
Exactly. And like you said, this is gonna probably take generations to change the mindset. Listen, let's just jump into, because I want to go through a couple of kind of like staples of rewilding, and you already mentioned wolves, and we might as well start with the wolves, knowing good and well that maybe that's probably not the first step, but let's start from the big one.
I think wolves are the first step, if we want to do it right. Now, a lot of people can disagree with me, and they're probably right to disagree with me, but I think looking at what we need to do in Ireland to kind of fix nature, like we need to have a big national transformative project. You see a lot of the stuff we're doing now. I don't know if I can think of any examples off the top of my head, but like maybe the tree planting. The government program to plant 440 million trees?
Yeah.
They were thicket trees, that's commercial forestry in the end. So like that's no benefit. But if they were planting woodland for a rewilding project to house wolves, they have to plant a specific type of tree. So the reason I say wolves are probably the first step is it's a targeted end goal. So we're not doing something just for the sake of doing this. There's no loose goals there that are open to kind of interpretation with the 440 million trees. So if we're planting trees for wolves, we have to plant a specific type of tree in a specific type of place. People have to kind of get paid for it, to get paid to do the right thing, basically. We can't just do commercial forestry if we're bringing in wolves. It's an umbrella project, I call it the whole time. So if we were to do it, we have to address conflicts. We have to address land ownership. We have to address how we're bringing in the wolves and importing them. We have to address what else we're bringing in. We have to address prey control. We have to address our national parks and fund them properly. We have to look at human-wildlife conflicts. We have to look at agriculture. We have to look at everything if we're bringing in wolves. We can't just go, we're bringing in wolves. You mightn't get that with, let's say, if we're bringing in the capercaillie. You wouldn't get the same level of dialogue and the same project you would if you were bringing in the wolves. Like the capercaillie needs huge pine forests that are, I'm trying to think now in case I say anything wrong, they feed on Scots pine, and they need to have mesopredator control. What else is there needs to be? That kind of be it. So you plant your Scots pine, you control corvid and fox numbers. That's it. You could probably do it in an area in Killarney National Park, Wicklow National Park, or something like that. Mm-hmm. But if you're bringing in the wolves, you have to talk the whole country. The whole country has to be on board with rewilding. Like if you get what I'm trying to say here, like there's no way you cannot address any potential problem with a wolf reintroduction. So that's why I think it's probably one of the first ones we should look at, or at least work to. Now, obviously, within that, we're not releasing them. We say on a Monday we're going to release them, and we release them on Tuesday. There's a process there. Like, so we have to kind of set aside the parkland first. We have to talk to farmers, make sure they're okay, get the corridors built up. If the farmers want to do it, then we have to maybe look at bringing in other animals, like maybe the lynx as part of a wolf reintroduction, maybe the boar as part of a wolf reintroduction. So we need to have that conversation as well. So it's an iterative process where we'll eventually get to the wolf as the end goal.
Yeah. So it's interesting because I say it's not the first step, but I kind of, and you said like, oh, it is a first step, but we actually meant the same thing.
Yeah.
It's not like the first step that number one, we cut loose a bunch of wolves, and then step two, we're going to figure out what's next. It's like, no. It's a first step, but it's a last step within the first step,
Exactly, but it is your end goal at all times.
Your end goal.
What we're built to do. I think one of the problems we have in Ireland is that we don't say what we want, basically, with projects. We go, oh, we're going to plant trees, and then when we plant the trees, we're going to release the wolves there. Like, they're two separate projects. If you're releasing wolves, you have to plant the trees that will grow eventually. Not that wolves need woodland, but they just need prey, and there's enough deer in the Greater Dublin region to do that. So you need to look at what your end goal is and then build the project from that. There's no other project in Ireland that would have the same scope and incorporate all the things we need to incorporate as wolves should.
Listen, so let me play a devil's advocate for a moment. And why would we do that? So what is the benefit of having wolves on the landscape other than it's cool to have a wolves on the landscape, right? It's nice to have them. We can maybe observe them. Maybe we can, video them. It's cool. I mean, man, there are wolves out there, right? And you may say like, oh, it's all nice, but it's like, why would you spend all that money and effort on such a massive transformative project if the end goal is like, look, cool, right? You might go somewhere else when they're already there and photograph them there and not invest all that money here and spend all this money on something else, like education or healthcare and so on and so on. So how would you answer to that?
Well, who's the benefit for? Does the benefit have to be for people?
Well, that's a question, and you know that the answer is usually yes. That's how we get there, right? This is how we get where we are, because the whole extinction, the whole de-wilding, let's say, was driven just by that, by benefit for people. And in fairness, this is something that was mentioned over and over. Oh, people need to benefit, farmers needs to benefit from that, right? So that aspect is there.
It is there, but the overarching benefit, does it have to be for people? Like, can we not just have nature in the country again? Like, there has to be. It cannot not be a benefit for people that will be directly impacted by it. So if we're bringing in wolves, rural communities, agricultural communities will have to have their say, and they'll have to be ensured that their way of life is protected. Like, you can't degrade anyone else's way of life just by bringing in an animal. So I suppose the question is, like, what else do we get with bringing in wolves? We get restored woodlands, we get reduced deer numbers eventually. We don't know that we're guaranteed it, but it's a pretty safe bet. We get other animals back, we get extensive farming that'll benefit other species in danger. So like with wolves, you get mesopredator control, you get extensive farming, so that's your curlew, your corncrake, lapwing, these animals that are impacted by human activity and mesopredators at the minute, we get those back. And we'll probably have wetland restoration as part of a nationally transformative rewilding project. So then you've flood retention, you're restoring the bogs in the Midlands, so then there's more employment there for people. Like, there's plenty of benefit there. It's maybe not one overarching benefit just for bringing back the wolves, but there is loads of benefits and opportunities within a nationally transformative rewilding project.
Yeah. So in other words, we create a lot of opportunities for people. And we have a kind of restored ecosystem and nature as a bonus almost to all that going on.
There is so much opportunity in it. Like, I could probably stay here for an hour just listening off things. I'd have to write them down because I'd probably say the same thing twice. But there is so much opportunity in basically returning to nature a bit at the minute. Like, if we look at it, like, there was droughts this year, and droughts happened last year. I think there was 2018 as well, was a drought. Like,
I guess that's a trajectory that we're on. We will have those droughts in the next 10 years, year after year. That's where it's going, right?
Exactly. So maybe we look at extensive farming that uses more of a natural grass mix. That way they have deeper roots, so the grass doesn't die off. You can still graze cattle on it. I'm not an expert here now, so I might be not saying it properly, but like, if we look at something like that, that's more extensive farming. It's not intensive farming. So like, could that be done? People get grants for doing farming like that, and that also protects the curlew and everything. You see, like, you need to start asking the questions this way. Like, I'm not a farming expert, so I'm not able to answer them, but is there things we can do that'll benefit nature and benefit farmers as well? Like, there's so much opportunity there.
Yeah. You see also benefits and opportunities in the tourism area.
Yeah, so there probably is a lot of benefit there in the tourism industry. I don't know where that's going to go with COVID now. That's kind of probably going to have a lasting impact on travel across the world. So there is benefit there. I don't know what it will look like next year.
I might just get delayed by
yeah, but there's
health.
even like permaculture benefits and stuff like as well. If we were going into woodlands and foraging basically for more natural products, we have like old oak products could be made. Like we had oak woodlands across the country where we could with continuous cover and fell ones occasionally. Like you have a serious market there for like products made from naturally made, environmentally beneficial oak.
Yeah. Listen, so we're speaking about wolf now. What are your views on bringing back wild boar?
I'm all for it.
Yeah, I'm expecting that, but like you see this as a part of bringing back wolves, or would you imagine to bringing boar before wolves or after, or kind of like in a package as source of food for them? Because like in a wild boar, whatever way you turn, you either hear like how great they are for environment and how they doing nothing but benefits for the environment, or like no, they're destroying habitat, they're destroying the ground nesting birds, they're destroying everything. It's like very
So boar gets a bad rep across the world, really. Well, here in the UK, as far as I can see, basically the current status of the boar in Ireland is the feral hybrid boar are deemed invasive, not the actual boar themselves, although the recommendation by the National Biodiversity Centre is to have a conversation on whether or not boar should be deemed native. I personally think they're native because they've co-evolved with all our plant species and animal species. So they can only have an impact that they've evolved to have on the environment. That being said, though, if we don't release them properly with the proper predators to keep them moving, they can be destructive, as seen in the Forest of Dean. They're kind of very destructive there. Like, they are destructive animals, but that's part of the natural balance and ecosystem. They're great in areas where rhododendron was cleared. Like, if you clear an area of rhododendron, they will literally not let any rhododendron grow there. That's really good for bringing back native plants, because there was a study released. I can't remember the name. I meant to look it up during the week. Sorry. There was a study released that showed after 30 years, areas that were cleared of rhododendron didn't actually have the same floral richness as places that didn't have rhododendron. So, like, they could be a post clearance management tool if they were released. Let's say in Clarny National Park, you could clear it. One of the major problems they have is seed setting again and coming back. So if there was boar there, we'd probably keep areas clear of rhododendron and stuff like that. So there is benefits there. I can understand why people don't want them. I think we need to maybe have a look at why people don't want them and have a discussion around that. But to me, bring them back with the wolf.
Yeah, in the package, right? We had a conversation a good few weeks ago about wild boars, and again on Twitter. And a few farmers were involved, and I think Padraig Fogarty was involved in that conversation as well. It was quite good, and a lot of information there. And my thing is, like, there is this like, whether it was native or whether it wasn't native, and do we have a bones, and do we not? Do we have an archaeological record? And maybe they were hybrid, maybe they were brought from the continent, and you gotta think, like, realistically, what would need to happen for them to not be in Ireland? Like, this is where I'm coming from. Like the knowing how expansive they are, knowing that the both islands were connected to the mainland Europe at some point. I guess the correct question would be not what would have to happen for them to be here. Is the other way around. Like, what natural disaster, whatever, would have to happen so we didn't have a boar. Right?
Exactly. Like, they definitely. I think they were here based on my study of it. I know the bones are hard to distinguish and everything, so there is the question over it. But I think they were definitely here. Like, if we had wolves without deer for 4,000 years, they were feeding on something, so it probably was wild boar.
Well, exactly. That's exactly the point. That and that's something I would like to dig deeper into. and maybe I will be able with some interesting guests towards the end of the year, where I heard that when it comes to wolf, there is still an unanswered question: what those wolves were feeding on, and like the one of the possible answers like wild boar, because otherwise there was not enough stuff to eat for wolves.
Yeah, no, I haven't read too much into it recently. I think I did a bit of reading into it a few years ago, but it has to be more.
Yeah.
They can't be eating anything else and sustaining that population like they did.
Yeah. Okay, I have two more. I have two more species I want to talk to you about, and then a bonus. So let's say we are going fast forward 50 years, or maybe 20, or maybe 60. We have wolves in Ireland. We have wild boar. We have a system in place that kind of works for farmers. It's always kind of, because never a situation when everybody is happy. Let's say we have those cornerstone species. We have wolf, we have bear. What did you say about bear? Would you go that far and bring back bear?
So I'm for everything. Basically, I'm full of really what I see with rewilding is filling the whole trophic, every trophic level and every niche in the ecosystem you can. The bear would be a hard one to sell. I haven't done the research into it yet. I'm not even sure of the ranges, but it is a possibility. Like, we can't knock it on the head. There's benefit to it, probably. If I say probably, there's definitely benefit to it. I just don't know what the benefit is. I'm for it. I can't speak too much on it because I haven't got there yet. It's hard enough to remember the wolf facts, so I haven't got to the boar yet.
Yeah.
Don't worry though, I'll get there eventually.
Okay, good. No, like a bear is, like, I tell you what's my benefit, or why I would like boar, like bear in Ireland. Like, when you coming back at night to your car, whatever you were doing in the woodlands, and you're going through the woods, and you know that the bear lives there, that gives you like a very special feeling. When you're walking through the woods and when you finally see your car, it's like, yes, I made it. But I know it's very selfish, and not everybody would like to, experience this sort of the emotions.
But that's something that's said so often, is how people feel when they're walking home at night in places where there's predators. A lot of people I've talked to have said it makes them feel alive, like you're walking around with like a stick in your hand or something, just to like make sure you'll be okay, just in case. Like, but some people, like, they love that, the feeling of, I don't know, how would you describe the feeling? What would you say it is? It's not fear, it's nervousness.
It is a fear. I think that a lot of, and this is maybe tying to our earlier conversation, what we said earlier about how people feel about nature and so on. People are too cocky. And I think it makes people better when they're humbled, and when they have a little bit this humbleness in their lives, and when you're walking through the woods, and you're like, you're not the on top of the food chain here, right? It makes you, here I say, a better person. And when like you're almost, I almost go as far as to say, like, you interact with other human beings differently when you're it's a little bit like in martial arts, when you're training and you beat up people, but you're also getting beat up, and then you're humbled, and then you see other human being a little bit different. You see another human being with greater respect. And I almost feel like this is kind of this feeling, there's like, there are other bigger things out there, and it's not like I'm this, mega king of everything, and like everything needs to be given to me, So
exactly
this is how I would describe it.
And if you tie that back in, let's say if you live in the countryside, like, you're less likely to cut down a tree or a rake of trees, because you understand this feeds the birds feed the wolves feed the bear, kind of thing. even though that's a very bad food chain, but just something off the top of my head.
Mm.
Like, you start to realize that you're a part of it and your actions will have implications further on down the food chain that might come back to get you. Like, if you get rid of a bear's food supply, like, that bear is coming looking for food somewhere else. Like, so you kind of think of where you are and what's your relationship to everything else. And it is respect for the land to a degree. Like, you understand your role in it and how you contribute and what is expected of you at a bare minimum. Like,
yeah, we almost kind of circling into another subject that was discussed on a podcast many times, which is benefits for mental health, outdoors, and benefits of the outdoors for mental health. So we almost kind of circling into that overall, it improves your mental health. You kind of going a little bit back to where you're supposed to be, kind of in the nature rather than in a artificial environment of four walls and luminescent bulbs on the
Yeah, it's something like, it is why I say rewilding is, it's restoration but with a bit more, like, there is a philosophical aspect to it as well, and that's probably something that we could look at a bit more, is how nature, like, helps people understand their role and what it does to some people's health, basically. Like, some people feel better when they're out in the woods or wherever. Like, and how that impacts, like, and if we live in artificial environments, like, are we kind of setting ourselves up for failure a bit?
Yeah, and I feel like a lot of people should experience that. A lot of people who are kind of like living their whole life in the city. When you're coming, like, many times we go, our buddy is running a fishing lodge. The moment you kind of step outside the car from that fishing lodge, you kind of like almost have this feeling like everything slows down. As like you relax, your body relaxes, everything slows down, and you see your fishing guy kind of walking slowly in his wellies, say, "Hey, how you doing, guys?" And this is such a contrast with this high pace life that you have in a cities. Listen, Dave, I have one more thing that I would like to ask, but I'm not sure if you don't know a whole pile about it, then it's okay. But you mentioned wildcats, and and going back to that, all the rewilders and all the farmers cannot be thrown in one bucket because these are groups who differs. I think it was over a year ago at this point, I noticed very interesting, conversation, let's say, where I think it came from Irish Wildlife Trust account, where they say that, they would be in favor of bringing back wildcats because they were native species and so on. And boy, that didn't go well with all the bird people. They were just up in arms, like, is this official statement from Irish Wildlife Trust? It's like, I could almost see all those memberships being cancelled by this unfortunate statement. Do you have any opinions on that?
Yeah, I have to be careful though how I say this. So basically, the wildcat would have been here at some stage. Like, we have the domesticated cat in Ireland at the minute. A lot of people let them out and let them hunt at night time. It's not really clear how much impact this has on the landscape. I'd say there's a bit of an impact, a good bit of an impact. I don't particularly agree with people letting domesticated cats out, but that impact is there already. So to get annoyed at the possible reintroduction of a once native species that fulfills a similar niche, I think we need to look at why there would be an impact. Is that an indication of a broken ecosystem? Like the wildcat in Scotland, it's one of its biggest threats is hybridization. But if the wildcat is there in woodlands, what impact does that have on birds? Like, what impact does that have on the native fauna there? I don't think anything can. What's the best way to say this now? Basically, I don't think anything can have an impact in a full ecosystem. Does that make sense? What I'm trying to say? If
Yeah,
everything's there, you're not going to have an
if you
impact.
have so essentially you're saying like if you have a healthy ecosystem, then every piece has its place, and
Every piece has a place, exactly. Like I think somebody on Twitter said you won't have invasives in a full ecosystem. Like there's no space for them to get in. Like the more full an ecosystem is, the more robust it is, the more less likely it is to be shaken and broken up. So that's kind of where I'd kind of put that question is, if we bring in a wildcat, is the ecosystem there to support it? Do we need to fix the ecosystem that's there to support it? If it has an impact bigger than its presence, is that an indication that the ecosystem is broken?
Yeah, a little bit like, so essentially a little bit like with the wolves. You know, they're not just bring a bunch of wildcats and cut them loose.
No.
The next
Like,
thing going to happen, they're going to hybridize with the house cats, and there's go your rewilding, right?
Like the wildcat will probably be a more difficult reintroduction than the wolf. If you think about it. Yeah, like I think that, and
because of hybridization.
Yeah, because think about who your stakeholders are in that. So if we're bringing in the wolf, we obviously have our rural communities, we have the agricultural, we have foresters and woodland. You don't really go to your urban centres, or the domesticated pets. But like once you're doing wildcats, you have all these people, but then you have the domesticated pets. So you have to bring in a program and probably have to look at getting an estimate or some sort of system set up to like record all cats, track them, make sure that people can't leave their cats outside anymore for fear of hybridization or basically being attacked by wildcats or attacking wildcats. Like that's a major cultural shift. Like that's a huge cultural shift if you think about it. Like people just let their cats outside. Like farm cats run around farms the whole times and everything. Like that couldn't go on if you had wildcats. Like obviously there's other stuff as well. Like getting the habitats for wildcats. That'd be a hard one. They'd have to be robust piece of woodland that you necessarily wouldn't need with wolves straight away. So you're looking at a delayed reintroduction. So you'd have to have your woodland first and then eventually put the wildcats in. Whereas with wolves, kind of the woodland would come with the wolves as they kind of keep the deer moving and everything. Like so, there is a lot more work in a wildcat reintroduction than there is in a wolf reintroduction, in my opinion. Anyway, like obviously the scale is different. You'd have a lot more people on a wolf reintroduction, but for a wildcat reintroduction, you'd probably only do 2 or 3 locations in the country, and there'd be an awful lot of work in it.
Right, that's very interesting. I never expected that answer, but I'm glad I asked it. So you think that the introduction of lynx would be easier than wildcat because you don't have a hybridization issue, and is that just like a bigger predator?
Not that it's a hybridization issue. It's that it's not a hybridization issue. It's a people kind of the stakeholder issue. Like, so you need people support for this. Like, and you're asking for your huge cultural change there to ask people not to let their cats out or to.
Do you think that the cat lady from Dublin would be opposing reintroduction of wildcats? I think you would find a lot of support from this sort of
I don't
demographic.
I think that'd be more difficult if it reintroduction.
I appreciate
that. In the comments on this, but like just thinking it through, like if you think about the wolf, like what do we need with the wolf? We just need a huge area, and we need corridors. We need like core areas all across the country, which are national parks. Probably you need your corridors set up, so you're setting up schemes of farmers to make sure it's extensive farming. You need to set up systems to make sure that any farmers that lose livestock, even though it'd be relatively small, there'd probably be, if the prey was good, and that they're paid for it. I think studies in Germany show it's only 3% of diet is livestock. So you set that up. So that's 3 things. You then do your education and your basically information programs where people become aware of what to do when you meet a wolf, kind of thing. Like, with Yellowstone, the bear list they have, do not approach a bear, back away, kind of thing. So you kind of build that into the public thing. You pick your wolves. That's probably something that's not talked enough about in Ireland. Like, where do we take the wolves from? what kind of effect that has on their behavior. Not that you'd see too much of an effect with the wolves that are in Europe at the minute. So you're doing that with that could happen. Like you release them, the trees would come later. The benefits of the wolves would come from the cascade down. But with wildcats, like it's a very tricky one. Like you can build your woodland, like you're there for 20 years, letting the trees grow in a certain area. The cats might not like it, but you've put all your woodland into that particular area. So the cats move on 30 kilometers down the road to where there's no woodland. So they're in like a semi-populated area with wild domesticated cats there. There's could be chickens that kind of thing, like that you haven't accounted for. Like so then you're into like another stakeholder that wasn't accounted for in the initial program for reintroduction. So like that's kind of why I see it as a bigger kind of reintroduction. But then on the flip side of that, if we reintroduce wolves nationally and then reintroduce the wildcat into pockets of woodland that have been developed, like you've a much higher chance of success there.
Yeah.
Do you get where I'm coming from there? Like, so that's kind of how I see it. Like one thing I'd love to do in Ireland, but I see it as a huge issue, is bring back the corn bunting. Like, do you know the bird, the corn bunting?
Yeah. Yeah, I heard about
so the extinct since the 1980s. I'd love it to bring the bird back because it's a farmland bird. I think that one of the keys for it was winter cereal cover. But that's like a huge thing to do in itself. You need to build in systems to pay farmers to keep the cover on the ground and everything. You need to source the birds. They're like fairly low in England as well at the minute. But like that's one of the programs I'd love to do or see be done in Ireland. But hedgerows are important as well. But like it's such a big job in itself because it's so specific to an area that's like it's not. It's a big job. Like you're more concentrated area, more kind of concentrated stakeholders, and it won't be given the same kind of appreciation that a national project like wolves would see. Does that make sense?
But it makes me think that it might be good foot in the door because if you're introduced bird or like let's say species of bird, people more likely to notice that. It's like, oh, look at that, how nice. And then they connect that to this, like, because we have this rewilding going on, right? Let's keep going because this is so nice, right? And that will make, give it like a better public perception of these sort of projects.
Yeah, so the red kites in Wicklow and North Dublin, they'd kind of be a project that would be looked on as a good success. Like the eagles in Ireland, there was a few issues there. I missed there was a speech on during the week by the Birdwatch Meat Branch on this. One of the highlights I saw from it was that they looked at the areas in the 90s for the reintroduction of the eagles, but by the time they got around to introducing the eagles in the 2000s, the areas had actually degraded and the prey was gone. So that's one of the reasons why conflicts arose. So that kind of goes to the point I was making about the wildcats. You need these specific areas, but you're no guaranteed the cats stay there. So are they going to be good in 20 years when you're hoping to bring the reintroduction and everything? I see where you're coming from for the kind of the quick win to get people on side, but would a quick win address everything in a rewilding program?
No, surely not. But it would like put it on the map. That's my point. You would have more people who understand it and see the value that is outside of my payment value. It's like, oh, it's cool. We have.
Yeah, I know where you're coming from there. I don't know what could be a smaller project to get people on side though that would have the same elements as a wolf reintroduction. Do you get where I'm kind of coming from here? Like, I don't think there's anything as transformative as a wolf reintroduction in Ireland now. Obviously,
for sure. That would be a big one. That would be a big one.
I don't know. I don't think about that.
Yeah, listen. It's excellent conversation. And one last thing I want to ask you about. You don't. So one of the things that I personally have I'm not comfortable with some of the rewilding movement is that it feels to me like the way it operates is, everything that we have now, or most of that what we have now is bad. We need to roll it back to the past. And I don't particularly like this idea of like, okay, let's move back to the past and not move forward. And to be honest, I thought you're gonna be more of this school of thought, but after over an hour of talking with you, you know that you don't come across as that guy at all. You have this very well thought out, and you clearly thinking forward. So your views are not like let's go back to where we were back in the. You thinking of going forward and rebuilding something going forward rather than just plainly go back.
Yeah. So
do you have any comments on that, on this sort of attitude of like, oh, everything that we've done for the last 100 years is bad and we need to roll back everything?
So I'd say it's more than 100 years if the people
or 1,000 or 12,000, like some say.
Yeah, so I suppose like for me, rewilding is the restoration of self-willed land with full trophic levels and a full ecosystem. So I think somebody said it there on Twitter a few weeks ago, and they talked about energy flow, and that kind of resonated with me because it was something that I kind of thought about in my undergrad. So like, if you look at an ecosystem, it's basically just a food web, but energy flowing through it. And like, there is no waste in an ecosystem. If you really think about it, like all the energy goes somewhere and it's all kind of circular. So that's kind of where my view on rewilding is, that like we should aim for full ecosystems, self-willed land with full ecosystems. Not necessarily the past, like we can't go back to the past, but we can use that as baseline for what we can have. Like if we look at, I know that you were saying you might want to talk about this, but megafauna, like if we look at that, like we had megafauna in Europe once upon a time, we had megafauna in Ireland. Like they had a role to play. They evolved over millions of years. I think some of them were 40 millions of years of evolution, and they died in the last 10,000 years. So like what effect has that had on the ecosystem sense? Like that's kind of where I'm thinking in terms of, I don't think we should go back. Like we can't go back. So I don't think we should be aiming for pristine wilderness, because wilderness, a lot of people use it to exclude people. I necessarily don't agree with that. I think people are part of the wilderness. I think though that we do need to look at building full ecosystems, full habitats. That's kind of my goal. How we do that and what is a full ecosystem or full habitat in certain areas, that's up for debate. And like, I'm not an expert, so whoever wants to kind of guide me there or guide the conversation, that I'm be more than happy to listen. But like, I think we do need to try and build new kind of, not new, but like full ecosystems. That's kind of my viewpoint, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Listen, it's been awesome conversation, David. As usually, at the end, I ask my guest, is there anything that we missed? So, is there anything that you thought we're gonna talk about and we didn't? And so now
I thought we were going to talk about megafauna.
Okay, please talk about megafauna.
I think we have different opinions on the megafauna extinction, and like I thought we were going to talk about that. So.
Oh yeah, we can, no problem, we can.
Well, I don't know, like I had some notes here prepared and everything just in case you were going to hit me with something. So you don't think that megafauna was human-driven at all, and that we don't need to include this as part of our rewilding kind of, not once, but like in the discussion, like we should we or should we not include megafauna?
Yeah. Well. First of all, they're gone, so we don't, we can't include them unless we're going into some genetic experiments. So I think the whole conversation is very much theoretical, and this is a part where when we going back. So I guess we talk about something that happened within our lifetimes when it comes to eradication of wolves or eradication of wild boar. It's something that happened within our lifetime, and I fully understand and can get behind that, especially that we have places not that far away where those animals are there and we see those ecosystems there. When we talking about going back to last Pleistocene, it's almost discussion about what caused it, whether there were natural causes or whether there were human causes, or whether human cause could be counted as a natural cause or maybe not. That's a discussion to be had. But I think regardless what is our view on that, we moved so far ahead from that point that we should assume that baseline already shifted, because these baselines are shifting all the time. So you can say like, well, why we want to go only 12,000 years ago? Maybe we should go 30,000 years ago. Maybe we should go, maybe we have too much oxygen in the atmosphere and we need to be, like 80% CO2, which is, by the way, where we're heading, as it seems. But you know what I mean? So the baseline is shifted, and I don't think that this is anymore. It's fun conversation to be had, but it's kind of like a conversation who would win a fight between Batman and the Superman. We just never. So this is where is my approach to that thing. So if you're talking about megafauna and you're talking about moose and you're talking about caribou and you're talking about buffalo, then yeah, right, because these are animals that we see today in, let's say, healthier ecosystems, and we can bring them back to the it's almost like let's pick for our climate zone, let's pick the healthiest ecosystem there is, and try to bring all the other ecosystems up to that standard, or even up it a little bit. But I feel like when we're talking about let's go back to the ecosystem that doesn't exist anymore for tens of thousands of years, and we don't even have animals that because they went extinct, then I feel like this is a step too far, or maybe not too far, but it's fun conversation to be had, but I don't think it's any more than that.
Okay, that's interesting. I have a slightly different view, and I kind of go back to my point just before with the full ecosystems. Like, I think if you look at it, like, there is still a lot of megafauna out there that have like roles. So if we go to Africa, like the elephants, the giraffes, the big five, like they all have a role to play. Like when I think about why would there be a discussion about megafauna in Ireland, like, do you know the corncrake, the little bird?
Mm-hmm.
And when that flies back to sub-Saharan Africa every winter, that stays in the forest, but it stays in clearings that are made by the African bush elephant. Mm-hmm. So like when you're thinking about megafauna that way, and we don't have the ecosystem for them, do you ask yourself, like, is that by design or is that by progression? Like, mm-hmm. That's kind of where I come in. And do we build a full ecosystem with these in them as a model for a thought experiment, or do we actually look at these and go, could they fit into our ecosystems today? Like, it is a discussion for something that'll happen 100 years down the road. Like, it's not going to happen overnight. Yeah. But I don't think we should exclude it from the discussion if we're having like a discussion across the board. Like, if we're talking about rewilding mm-hmm. and creating full ecosystems, megafauna are probably a part of that conversation. And it's something that a lot of people don't understand. Like, it's something I've only got kind of comfortable with in the last few years. Like, up until 2016, I was against wolf reintroduction into Ireland.
Really?
Yeah, I was very against it. Because I was kind of the older school of conservation thought. I was very into like adaptive management as kind of a way to go forward. But till 2018, like, I'd never really considered fauna. Like, I've kind of only in the last 4 or 5 years got mm-hmm. into the whole reintroduction thing. But mm-hmm. the last 2 years, I've only started to talk about megafauna. I think the discussion needs to be had, though. It's probably something that people need to look at a bit more to understand the importance of it, like the nutrients that got moved around because of them, the impacts that's had. Like, I was listening to a podcast there today, I can send it to you afterwards, but mm-hmm. supposedly the saber-toothed tiger evolved separately over like 4 or 5 times over the whole span of the earth. Like, so that is obviously like the peak of design there. If we got convergent evolution where that kind of design is coming up again and again. So like the megafauna discussion is something that I think needs to be part of the rewilding discussion, just at the very least to see where people understand, to educate, and maybe have a look at, do we need hyena in Connemara? Like, that's a conversation that nobody's ever had fully. I don't know what your opinion is on it. Maybe
no,
if we...
my opinion is like you're about wolf prior 2016. I think that geological chapter of history is closed.
But do you think that the geological chapter is closed, but the ecosystem that existed then, the remnants of it are still here?
Oh yeah, obviously, yeah. But you know, it's like with everything. So I suppose there is a question, you know, when we draw a line and why we deciding, you know, sitting right now, what is the perfect ecosystem? Because it's not like, oh, we have this ecosystem and it was like perfectly stable and not changing, and then something happened and now we need to bring it back to that perfect point. It was changing all the time. So when you're saying like, oh, I would love, you know, if I can wave the magic wand and I would like to have an ecosystem, you know, prior Younger Dryas, right? Then the next, like, why there? Why not, you know, 100,000 years earlier even? Or maybe even, you know, so at some point, this is all changing, and I am not comfortable with us sitting here, like us as humans, and saying like, now that point in time was a perfect point in time, and we need to bring everything back to that point in time because that was great. Like, well, no, it is changing. So I think that at some point we have to accept the change, and this is what was happening many times throughout the history of the Earth. Like, the organisms were dying, the composition of atmosphere and gases were changing, and things were unstable, and they were then trying to stabilize, and they were like more or less stable, and then something else was changing. So I don't think anything ever going to be like 100% stable.
No.
And so, you know, it's almost like a part of me, like I said, being uncomfortable of picking, you know, pick the time where we need to bring it back. Like, well, we need to bring back to, you know, 12,000 years ago. No, we need to bring it back like 30,000 years ago. It's like, well,
but is
why we doing that? Why not move forward? Because, you know, if you reverse that and you think like, from this point that we are at now, you go, you know, 100,000 years forward, you know, if we're not going to wreck the planet completely, there are probably going to be new forms that will evolve, or maybe if we wreck the planet and kind of remove ourselves from the ecosystem, then some other form will evolve going forward. And it's like, well, so, you know, you understand that you're on a time frame, on a scale of time that is changing, and something was there and it's gone, and something will be in the future, but it's not there yet. So I would, you know, that's why I'm kind of slow to go too far outside of the point in time where we are right now.
So I wouldn't look at it as point in time. I'd look at it as a food chain, a kind of an ecosystem in itself. Like, so you probably disagree with this, but like megafauna, it looks like it was exacerbated by human activity, human colonization. Mm-hmm. So if the humans weren't here, like the animals might still be around. So like, that's an interesting kind of thought in itself. It's not back in that point in time, like 10,000 years ago. It's, if they existed now, what would their role be in the ecosystem? Would they still have a role in the ecosystem? And what benefit would that bring to other animals in the ecosystem? So that's kind of where I'd be coming from the conversation. It's not necessarily going back 100,000 years to the Younger Dryas, or it's the Younger Dryas 100,000 years, sorry. It's not going back to that point in time. It's looking at, would these animals exist today in this ecosystem, and are they needed to complete the circle?
Yeah.
I don't know, like, I feel like it's probably a conversation that hasn't fully taken off yet. Like, it's probably a conversation that'll be happening in a few years down the line, but it's still a conversation that people, I think it's good if they're aware of it, like, because it is, it's, like you said, it's fun to think about. Like, it's the Batman versus Superman of rewilding. Like, what would happen if there was elephants in England? Like, it's an interesting thought. I think it'd be fun to find out. I think there is benefit to it.
They'd be smashing SUVs on the motorway.
There'll be no more commutes. I don't know. I just think it's something that it probably needs to be discussed. Like, there's, I know the Rhea is introduced into Germany now, isn't it? The flightless bird.
Oh, I didn't hear that. No, I don't know.
I think there's some in Germany released from a farm or something, and they're playing the role of like an extinct mega bird that used to be there. Yeah, I'm going to have to look that up. It's been a few years since I've heard it. But that's like an interesting way to look at it. Like in Escobar's hippos in South America, they're playing like a role in the ecosystem now because they're there and they're moving nutrients around. So like we see these
but they're actually deemed obviously invasive species, and what I heard is that they causing massive damage to the environment.
But is it like damage of establishment, or is it like long-term degrading damages? It's the same with the boars.
I think this is exactly, and I think this is exactly the point I was trying to make, that things moved on, and the role that they were played, there was nothing to play that role for, then such and such thousands of years, and now we don't really need that role, and something else is in the place of that role. So now we reintroduce that, and by that we're gonna destroy what already was moved forward in the name of going backwards to some point. And then I feel like I think it's uncomfortable to make that decision for us, like a human, like, the things move forward, and we never had like a massive herbivore in where is it, in Colombia, but they were there 10,000 years ago. So now we're gonna put there, and they're gonna do all this destruction, but it's fine because they're starting to play a role that they didn't play there for 10,000 years. So this is where I'm kind of uncomfortable with this. So like, I am willing to accept that the things moved forward, and we don't need that massive herbivore in Colombia anymore. Because the things move forward, and we have other species that are there, and that massive herbivore maybe not necessarily fits anymore as good as, it's almost like a wound, you just rip out something and something else starts going in there. It's like, this is my view on this.
That's interesting. I'll convert you yet, don't worry.
All right, no worries. I'm as always, I'm happy for discussion. And listen, David, thank you very much for that conversation. It was extremely interesting, and all the best for setting up the project and for setting up discussions going forward. For everybody listening to that, on Twitter at Rewilding IRE, or just Rewilding Ireland. I hope that you will have more engagement after this podcast, and hopefully all positive.
Hopefully.
And thank you very much.
Cheers. Thank you very much, Tommy. I'll talk to you again.
Talk to you. Bye-bye.
Bye.